سيدنا محمد أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحابته والتابعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. اللهم لا علم إلا ما علمتنا. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Now, inshallah, before we actually go into the subject, for the benefit of people who haven't gone through this, because I know some people here have, and it's a good review, and for the benefit of people that haven't, that's why I'm going to go through it. So this is actually a fatwa of my teacher, Murabit Al-Hajj, which concerns the importance of following the imams. And before I go into it, I just want to explain. Basically, last night we talked about, when we were discussing the matter of the science of ihsan, that there were imams of that science. And how you know that you're not going astray is by following the imams, that there is a general consensus about their uprightness. And this is from the Quran, because the Quran says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Now, to give you another example of that, which is an interesting one, I think, from the seerah, is that when the Prophet ﷺ initially had his wahi, he actually was completely distraught, because he really didn't understand what was happening. And the first thing that he did, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was he went to Khadija. Now Khadija was the closest person to him, and so it would be natural that he would go to his wife and tell her what was happening. In other words, somebody that he could trust. Now Khadija al-Kubra, that's what she's called, the great Khadija, was an absolutely phenomenal woman in every way. But I think one of the most extraordinary things that we know about her, because we don't know enough about her, because the Meccan period is a period that our information on it is much less than the Medinan period. We know a lot more of detail, because the Medinan period is much more important in terms of the running of a society. The Meccan period, the lessons that are important we know, but a lot of the hadiths, in fact, are not transmitted, because many of them were actually abrogated. And the later Sahaba, like Abu Huraira, who was very late, is one of the dominant translators of hadith. So during what she did was she said that we should go to Waraqa bin Nawfal. Now, why would she say that? Right? Well, why? Does anybody, why would she suggest that? What's that? But why Waraqa? He was Ahl al-Dhikr. He knew something about this phenomenon that neither of them knew, because he was somebody who had knowledge of revelation. The Arabs didn't know revelation. And Khadija instinctually said, something's going on here. You're not the type of person that the jinn are going to afflict, because they knew. In societies, you know the type of people that will go mad. Generally. Really. I mean, people do. You can see signs. And the Prophet ﷺ did not have any of those signs. So Khadija knew, no, your Lord is not going to do something harmful to you. Let's go to Waraqa bin Nawfal, because here's a man who's from Ahl al-Dhikr. In other words, he's somebody who knows about this very subject. And that's what they did. And what does Waraqa say? This is namus. He told the Prophet, this is namus. In other words, he explained to the Prophet ﷺ, this is revelation, because he knew what it was. He understood what revelation was. And here is a clear example very early on of the Prophet ﷺ going to the only person in Mecca that could have given him that answer. There was nobody else. There was nobody else in Mecca that could have given him that answer. Waraqa is the man. Now there were Jews in Medina that could have, like Abdullah bin Salam and others, radiallahu anhum. But in Mecca, Waraqa was the man. And that's who Khadija said to go to ask the question. What we should take from that, the wisdom is that when you do not know something, you go to the people who know about that thing. And irrespective of what the matter is, if it's medicine, you go to a physician. If it's engineering, you go to an engineer. If it's an agricultural concern, you go to the agriculturalist. You have to go to the people of that science. And that's what the intelligent person does. وَمَا خَابَ مَنِ اسْتَخَابَ. You can't go astray, you can't lose if you take good counsel. If you take nasiha, if you go to the people of nasiha. So each one of the sciences has their imams. Now, if you look at the epistemology of the Muslims, and by epistemology I mean the way that we know something, how it is that we know something is true or not true. So there's an epistemology, there's a methodology at understanding, there's a methodology of understanding how we know something. And the foundation of Muslim epistemology is ultimately trust. And if you look, and there's some interesting literature on this, even in the Western tradition, if you look, the foundation of what most people know is based on trust. So just to give you an example of that, there's an idea of mutawatir, and people should understand that term. Mutawatir is when you have, in the hadith science, it's when there's so many chains or narrations of transmission that it is impossible for there to be a lie. There could not have been a conspiracy of people agreeing to tell a lie, because it's just too diverse. Now, I personally think, and this is my own opinion, I think that the ulama use mutawatir as a foundation for truth in Islamic epistemology. And I think that probably it's no longer true with modern media, because you have the power now to disseminate information all over the earth that's blatantly false propaganda. You did not have that power before, but it is in the hands of certain people now. And you can literally put false rumors all over the world. You can create images on television because everybody's hooked up to CNN, whether they're in the Middle East, whether they're in America, whether they're in China or Russia, and very easily they could put images that are doctored or false, and suddenly it becomes mutawatir knowledge, right? Virtual wars and things like that. So when you look at the idea of mutawatir, if somebody tells you where is Malaysia, which is a bad example because a lot of Americans don't know that. So we should say where's, I don't know about Canadians, but Americans wouldn't. If you'd say where is England, there's probably still a lot of people don't know that anymore. But generally that's considered mutawatir knowledge, right? Most people will say it's an island off of the continent of Europe, and it's actually part of Europe. It's north, right, east of the American continent, north, northeast. And that's mutawatir. Now, whether you've been there or not, you believe that, right? If you've never seen England, I don't think there's anybody here who hasn't been to England that would deny it. They'd say, no, absolutely not, doesn't exist. And I say, why? And you say, because I've never seen it, right? Even if you haven't seen it, you believe that it exists. Why? Because enough people believe that it exists and have been there, right? And seen it. So like that, information based on trust is transmitted through generations, right? Now, in the Islamic ethos, we have trustworthy people. In other words, we have what's called mahallu thiqa. And one of the words for a trustworthy transmitter is called thiqa, which is the place where you feel trust there. Wathaqa is, there's trust. Urwat al-wuthqa. in the Quran is called Urwat al-Wuthqa. It's the most trustworthy handle to take hold of. So a thiqa is a person that you trust, is not lying to you. So if you know this person and he tells you, I just came from Toronto and there's a massive fire there, there's no reason for you to doubt that person if you know they're trustworthy and he's saying, I actually saw it. Now obviously it's a higher knowledge for you to go there and actually see it yourself, because now you transmit that to somebody else. So-and-so told me that there's a fire in Toronto and he saw it. Now if the person you're telling trusts you, then they'll believe it. But if they happen to know that you're somebody who's known to tell stories, right, fabricate things, then they might doubt it, even if it's true or not. So the transmission of knowledge is based on trust in Islam. And the first and foremost source of our trust is Al-Amin, is the Prophet ﷺ himself. He is Al-Amin. He is the trustworthy one. He's telling us that Jannah exists. He's telling us that Jahannam exists. He's telling us that the Quran is a revelation. And we're trusting him. Ultimately, we are placing our trust in the Messenger of Allah. Because when you say Amantu billahi, it means I place my trust. Right? Amana is a trust, and Iman is from Amana. And the Prophet said, La imana liman la amanata lah. He has no Iman, the one who has no trust. So Iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a trust in what? In Allah first and foremost. In His messengers, in His books, in His angels. We are trusting that these things are true and that these are valid sources. That the angel is a source and a trustworthy source of knowledge. Jibreel alayhi salam. He's called Allamahu Shadid, right? Shadid al-Quwa, the fierce one, right? He's Qawlu Rasulun Kareem. He's a noble messenger. And noble people don't lie. So when you look at the sciences, you have to recognize that we do have a basic trust in our imams. We trust them. And now people can say, no, I only trust Allah and His Messenger. Well, that is just somebody who has not thought out the situation. Because what you know about Allah and His Messenger is what has been transmitted by trustworthy sources. In other words, if you say, I only trust what Allah and His Messenger say, how do you know what Allah and His Messenger said? Because the Quran has been transmitted. The Quran is transmitted. How do you know that that book that you have, the Quran, unless you took it from somebody who took it from somebody who took it from somebody, and you trust all the chain of narration, you don't know that that book hasn't been, things have been replaced. This is what happened to the Christians, right? The Christians' book has been changed and altered, and yet they still trust the people who print those books, that they're true. And it gets worse because now they change it arbitrarily because of political correctness. Quite literally, they just change things because that's old-fashioned. And they don't tell the people. So the person goes to the bookstore to buy a Bible. He doesn't know this is in fact a politically correct Bible. And there's been things that have been taken out of that book. So we know that the Quran is absolutely sound because of the chain of transmission. The Hadith, you're trusting Al-Bukhari's research in the men that he took from. You're trusting Imam Muslim's research. You're trusting Imam Malik's research. You're trusting Ibn Wahb's research. You're trusting then each chain of transmission. And furthermore, you're even trusting the Lebanese booksellers, which is a disaster. Because they're not trustworthy, unfortunately. No offense to Lebanese people. But they're just not anymore. They're out for money. And beautifully, hadith illustrate, at-tujjar hum al-fujjar. Merchants, they are corrupt people. And one of the Sahabas said, كيف يكون ذلك يا رسول الله? How could that be true when Allah has made tijara halal? And he said, because they do things like swear oaths and they know it's a lie, just to make money. And that's not an insignificant hadith. And that is why that a true merchant, a tajir al-sadiq, is with the shuhada on the Yawm al-Qiyamah. And anybody who's had any practice of commerce will know why that hadith is true. Because it's very difficult to be absolutely 100% truthful in all of your business transactions. I guarantee you. Anybody, I mean, you tell the person, oh, that coat looks great on you. You're just lying. You're lying, to sell a garment. Right? Or it's a really good bargain. And you know it's a lie because it was made for 10 cents in Costa Rica and you're selling it to them for $150, right? I mean, this is what merchants do, unless they be given tawfiq from Allah. So, the point being is that we place trust in our sources of knowledge. Now, who do we place our trust in? Ahl al-Dhikr, who are they? They're thiqat. That have, the ummah in each generation has said, these are the trustworthy people of this science. How do we know that they're trustworthy? Because the vast majority of our scholars have accepted them and they don't have ikhtilaf. There's not big ikhtilaf in them. In other words, if you find a scholar in which there's a lot of difference of opinion in him, it means he's somebody that you have to be careful with. Somebody, I guarantee you, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, you won't find difference of opinion. Amongst the entire ummah of people who know the science of hadith, you're not going to find difference of opinion. He is an imam in that science. The same is true about Imam al-Bukhari. The same is true about Imam Qadi Iyad. The same is true about Al-Hafiz Ibn Abd al-Barr. In the science of usul, you won't find difference of opinion. Imam al-Baji is one of the great usuliyin. In the science of tafsir, Imam al-Jassas, the Hanafi scholar, is one of the great imams. Nobody's going to debate that. And therefore we know they're rightly guided. Does that mean that everything that they tell us is true and accurate? No. There are probabilistic errors in their works. And some of the errors are clear and blatant and have been pointed out by scholars who come later. Right? So the rightly guided works have been looked at and literally, like a sieve that they take over the centuries, scholars will come, they'll pick up the work, put it in their sieve and they'll shake it and they purify it. And so after 10 centuries, you have a book like the Muwatta, and you have several commentaries on it. Great minds have looked at it, they've gone through it, and they've given us the final word. So this is a basic trust that we're having. Now, with the science of, you have that with the science of Aqidah, you have that with the science of Fiqh, you have that with the science of Ihsan. You have this with all the sciences. So this is basically now just an exposition on what then is necessary for us as simple Muslims. And Sidi Abdullah said, he mentioned this morning, and really, it was amazing because Sheikh Ibn Abi Jamrah, who's a big wali of Allah, the book he's reading from, he was somebody amazing. And I was telling Sidi Anas that at the end of his book, I mean, I think it's just so interesting because, with books, you pick up a book like this one, and on the back it'll say, we certify that this translation corresponds to the Arabic original and conforms to the practice and faith of the Orthodox Sunni community, Al-Azhar. There is no doubt that this translation is a valuable and important work, whether as a textbook, Dr. Taha Jabir Al-Alwani, etc. This is truly a magnificent piece of work, Dr. Farhat Ziyada. We have here in an English and authoritative compendium of Muslim law, Dr. John Williams, The Muslim World. So this is called, in logic, this is actually logical fallacies, right? It's an appeal to authority, right? But I mean, it's true. They're all saying true things. This is an amazing book. But this is an appeal to authority. Now, if they really are authorities, as I said earlier, then there is credence in what they say. But generally what booksellers will do is they'll just put names on books to give the book some, and I've always wondered why, you just don't put and maybe they do, just make them up. I mean, I'm sure he didn't, but maybe they do, Henry Kissinger, you must read this book, and what's he going to do? Sue the people or something like that, So the point being is that in Sidi Ibn Abi Jamrah's book, at the end of his book, he has 70 visions of the Prophet ﷺ, either seen by him or by others, telling you to read his book. And I just think that's so amazing, that's who's on the back of his book. The Prophet has 70 visions telling people, read this book. And in one of the visions, the Prophet ﷺ told one of the Imams, go and tell Ibn Abi Jamrah that he has understood my words. And that if you want to understand my words, to look at what he says in his commentary on Imam al-Bukhari's book. And it's extraordinary. So that's part of a proof of the validity of the book when several people all over the Muslim world, and the amazing thing about the visions is they didn't end in his life. People continued to see them afterwards. So this is part of, this just strengthens the source if the vision is seen by a thiqah. In other words, he's not lying. Like one of the hadiths that was fabricated on the Prophet ﷺ is, whoever eats eggplant every day will never be afflicted by diseases. And it's a fabricated hadith that a man who used to sell eggplants in Baghdad started spreading the hadith. And there were people that did that, merchants that would make these things up. So the visions were seen by people who were thiqah, they were sources of trust. And in one of the visions that Yusuf al-Nabahani saw of the Prophet that he mentions in his book Shawahid al-Haq is about Imam al-Ghazali, because he was warning people about saying anything bad about Imam al-Ghazali. He saw the Prophet ﷺ in a vision, and Yusuf al-Nabahani is a thiqah, he's a scholar that we trust. He saw the Prophet ﷺ in this dream, was sitting with all of his companions, and he asked the Prophet ﷺ a question, and the Prophet put his hand ﷺ to his right, and he said, indicating to ask this person, and he looked, and it was Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. That he was pointing to him to answer the question. And Yusuf al-Nabahani said he realized the maqam, or the station that the Imam had with the messenger, if he was deferring his answer to the Imam. So you will find this in our tradition, confirmations that people have in their visions about these people. And we don't base hukm on vision. In other words, there's no judgment based in Sharia. You cannot make a hukm based on a vision of the Prophet ﷺ. But visions of the Prophet ﷺ do strengthen the authority. And this is why they're transmitted in the books. People do see visions. And all of our Imams, Al-Aini transmits visions, Imam Nawawi transmits visions. They mention visions as ways of explaining to people the validity of certain positions as a strengthening, not as a hukm, like saying, oh, this is why it's so because of the vision. No, but the vision confirms the hukm, that's all. So in this fatwa, he begins by saying that he considers one of the most important replies that he's given, because Murabit Al-Hajj in the land of Mauritania is considered a thiqah. People trust his fatwa, and people will send fatwa from far distances because they trust his fatwa. And so this man asked him a question here, and that is, what do you say about people who censure the studying of branches of knowledge without studying the actual sources of the knowledge? In other words, what do you say about somebody who learns the wudu or learns the aqidah without understanding how these ahkam were derived and brought out? Now, just to point, in terms of aqidah generally, the scholars say there's no taqleed. It's haram to make taqleed. If you make taqleed in aqidah, there's a difference of opinion. Some say it's completely unacceptable, and others, like Imam Subki said, it's acceptable if the muqallid's iman was so firm that if the person that he was trusting actually went into ridda, apostated, that the muqallid wouldn't lose his iman. So if somebody taught you tawheed and he was the source of your understanding, and then a'udhu billah, he left the deen, and yet that didn't waver your belief in what you knew, then Imam Sufi says that that's a valid iman. But generally they say no, there's no taqleed in iman. You cannot be muqallid in iman. You have to understand iman for yourself. You have to believe in Allah based on your own understanding. Whereas in the furu' of fiqh, you have to have an imam unless you reach that level, and that's what he's going to talk about. So he says, would that he had claimed ijtihad for himself only, and Allah is his reckoner, and abandoned the call of Muslims to leave that which is incumbent upon them. In our reply to such a one, we make mention what the scholars of the methodological basis of Islamic jurisprudence, the usuliyin, and the imams of the jurisprudence themselves has said about such a matter. As for my labeling him a deviant, it is only because he has desired to impose upon common people the precious rank of absolute independent reasoning, about which Muhammad al-Nabigha said, an ijtihad in the land of the Moroccans, the western phoenix has taken flight with it. Muhammad al-Nabigha is a famous Mauritanian scholar, and what he was saying was the western phoenix, the Anqa Mughribi, was a bird, mythological bird that they said used to come out of Arabia every 500 years and go to Egypt and would steal like babies and things and then go back. And so it's a mythological bird. What he's saying is the mujtahid comes every 500 years. So ijtihad, the anqa, the phoenix, came and took ijtihad away, and we just haven't seen it for a long time. So he's saying, I say in reply to the following qualified scholarship, taqleed is an obligation on anyone other than absolute mujtahid. In other words, what he's saying is it's wajib to follow somebody of qualified scholarship that you trust, if you are not an absolute mujtahid. And I will make mention of all his necessary prerequisites, inshaAllah. Sidi Abdullah Al-Hajj Ibrahim. And this is a book, by the way, which is taught in Al-Azhar and in Medina University, in their section on usul. It's called Murabit Al-Hajj. It's 1,001 lines by 1001 lines by Sidi Abdullah Al-Hajj Ibrahim. He said in his Murabit Al-Hajj, taqleed is necessary for other than the one who has achieved the rank of absolute ijtihad. Now if you look, there is ranking in ijtihad. The first and highest rank is called mujtahid mutlaq. I don't have a board, but the first and highest ranking is called mujtahid mutlaq. A mujtahid mutlaq, when we talk about ijtihad, what ijtihad means is anything other than what there is a absolute proof for. Qat'i. Qat'i means it's a decisive proof and there's no debate about it. When there is a qat'i proof for something, there is absolutely no room for ijtihad. Ijtihad comes when you have some ambiguity or there's something equivocal in the statement that the legal ruling is coming from and the imams differ on it. At that point you move into ijtihad. Who is capable of making ijtihad? Now the vast majority of rulings in Islam are ijtihadi rulings. Now why would that be? Why would Allah make the vast majority of rulings in our deen from ijtihad? Why? Why do you think? What's that? Not really, because ijtihad can be a fixed thing. I mean, ijtihad does have that element of change, but the vast majority of ijtihadi rulings are not. They don't change. They're the same. Okay, I think there's something there that you have different cultures and different understandings. But what ultimately is ijtihad? What is the actual process of it? What is ijtihad? What's the root word? Jihad, right? That's the root word. So why would Allah make ijtihad the vast majority of legal rulings coming out of ijtihad? It's لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ نَنْزَلْنَاهُ قُرْآنًا عَرَبِيًّا لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ. We sent this down as an Arabic Quran to force you to use your intellects. And the nature of Arabic is that it is an equivocal language. I mean, the Arabs have a whole science of tawriyah. They have a whole science of literally saying one thing that has possible different meanings. The language is filled with it. It's filled with ways of saying something that have completely different meanings. What it does is it forces you to exhaust your intellectual powers. And the most essential rhetorical element in the Arabic language is ellipsis. It's constantly not finishing a full thought. In other words, it leaves it to where the person listening is forced to finish the thought, to finish the understanding. The Quran is filled with that, and that's why so many tafsirs there's brackets that are filling in the lacunae. The thinking, the process is filled in by these lacunae, right? So that's why ijtihad is to force us to think. Now, not everybody can think at that level. It's just a fact of life. Not everybody is capable of thinking at the highest level, right? Because Allah has created a creation of varying understanding. There's tafawut. There's difference in understanding. So he says, so the first one is mujtahid mutlaq, which is an absolute mujtahid. He is the one who's able to make ijtihad. And the next one is called mujtahid muqayyad. Mujtahid muqayyad. Mujtahid muqayyad is somebody who has limited analogical reasoning abilities because of knowledge limitations. In other words, his knowledge is limited, so he cannot make absolute ijtihad. And these people are forced to follow the methodological practices of the mujtahidun and muttaqun. In other words, what the mujtahid does is he shows you how he does his ijtihad. So it's like he gives you an ABC, like a logarithm of how he arrived. And the different Imam, Abu Hanifa has a different logarithm. Imam Malik has a different logarithm. Imam Shafi'i has a different logarithm. If you are a mujtahid mutlaq, you will derive your own logarithm. If you are a mujtahid muqayyad, you have to follow the process of one of the imams. You can't make up your own. You have to follow one of their processes. And then the third category is called mujtahid murajjih. This is a mujtahid who looks at what the mujtahidun and muqayyadun have done, and he decides which one is the best opinion. In other words, he can look at the varying ijtihads. He doesn't do independent reasoning himself, but he's able to do ijtihad by looking at how they arrived at it and what proofs they're using, and to decide this opinion is better than that opinion. So for instance, in the issue of qabl or sadl in the Maliki madhab, most of the mujtahidun and muqayyadun went with the sadl is the dominant opinion. That's the dominant opinion. But there are murajjihun in the madhab who said no, the proofs for qabl are stronger. And they went with that. Like Ibn al-Arabi or al-Lakhami, Imam al-Lakhami. Now, interestingly enough, very few people in this ummah have reached the level of ijtihad of tarjih, the third level. Very few, only a handful in all the madhabs. Very few people. I mean, you think of some of the great imams, and they weren't mujtahidun murajjihun. Now, the next level, the fourth level, is mujtahid ifta. And this is the mujtahid who can give a fatwa. He can tell you what the dominant hukm is. And he can also, if there's a new nazila, he can make ijtihad. In other words, if it's a matter that there's no precedent, he's not able to go back and look at previous imams, he's able to give you a fatwa based on qiyas or based on masalih al-mursala or one of the usuli principles. I mean, analogy or general good, things like that, utilitarian purposes. And then the final level is called the faqih, right? And you could take that really to, I mean, you could take it to the next level, which is mutafaqih. Now, most of the later scholars, like Yusuf al-Nabahani, considered himself a mutafaqih, right? Imam As-Sawi. I mean, Imam As-Sawi was a great Maliki scholar. Muhammad Ali, Sheikh al-Azhar in the 19th century, he considered himself mutafaqih. He didn't even consider himself at the level of the great people of ifta before, even though he has fatwa. And then finally, at the very bottom, you have what's called an ammi, which is what we are, all of us. We're awam. We're not even in that list. None of us. And if you meet somebody in this age that thinks that they are, then you're in trouble. Really, you're in trouble. And wallahi, I'm not exaggerating that. I think there's probably mutafaqihun. There's some people that are at the level of mutafaqih now. I would highly doubt that there's a faqih. Maybe there is. I mean, I can't, it's something you can't, al-ihata lillah. But most of the real people that I trust, the ulama that I've met that I trust, they say there's not fuqaha. There's mutafaqihun. And Allah knows best. So the ammi is somebody, they don't have any tools. What do they do then? Taqleed. They follow the way of the people that have this knowledge. Now, he says in here that it's incumbent upon you to do that, whoever falls short achieving the rank of absolute ijtihad to following a particular madhab. Again, in Maraqi al-Saudi says, the consensus, the consensus today is following one of the four, and all have prohibited following others. In other words, all of the ulama, and he's saying this 200 years ago, all of the ulama have prohibited following other than these four madhabs. It's mamnu', it's prohibited to do that. He says in Nashr al-Bunud, his commentary on this,
This means that the consensus of scholars today is on the four schools of thought. I mean by them Malik, Abu Hanifa, Shafi'i, and Ahmad. Indeed, all of the scholars have prohibited following any other school of an independent absolute mujtahid since the 8th century when the school of Dawood al-Zahiri died out. So in the 8th century, the last school that was permissible outside of the four was the school of Imam Abu Dawood al-Zahiri, which was called the Madhab al-Zahiri. And there's some people trying to revive that madhab now. Literally, they want to follow Madhab Abu Dawood al-Zahiri. Why can't, if a madhab dies out, even though it's all written, why can't it be revived? Allah yubarak fikum. There's no chain of transmission. It's stopped. And that's the whole point of the deen. That's the secret that we have. There is a chain of unbroken transmission. And if it stops, Allah has cut it. The chain is cut, and you can't go back and reestablish the link, because the link is human beings. They're the links in the chain. They're the hamalat al-ilm. They're the people that carry the knowledge to each generation. And as time goes on, it gets weaker and weaker. That's why it's much easier to break towards the end. The first, if you were holding on to that first part, Allahu Akbar. But as time passes, it gets weaker and weaker. Right? So he says it means, and then he says, as for the one who is not a mujtahid, then basing his actions on primary textual evidence is not permissible. In other words, it's haram. He says in Nashr al-Bunud, it means that it is prohibited for other than a mujtahid to base his actions upon a direct text from either the book and the sunnah. Even if its transmission was sound, because of the sheer likelihood of there being other considerations such as abrogations, the nawasikh, limitations, taqyid, muqayyad, specificity, like if it's khas, certain situations, other matters that none but the mujtahid fully comprehends with precision. Thus, nothing can save him from Allah the Exalted except following a mujtahid. Imam al-Qarafi, one of the great usuli scholars, says, quote, and beware of doing what some students do when they reason directly from the hadith and yet they don't know their soundness, let alone what has been mentioned by the imams concerning the subtleties involved in them. By doing this, they went astray and led others astray. And whoever interprets a verse or a hadith in a manner that deviates from its intended meaning without a proof, dalil, is a kafir. That's Imam al-Qarafi. It's not, it's not a game. I mean, the point is these imams were literally saying, don't mess with it. This is about people's akhirah. This is not like, you make a mistake in a grammar book, it's not going to be really harmful for people. It's not. But you make a mistake in the ahkam, and you're dealing with people's guidance. Right? It's guidance, and that's why they're making it so strong. This is called sad al-dhari'ah. It's cutting off the pretext of allowing for anarchy in our tradition. As for the conditions of absolute and independent ijtihad, they are mentioned in Mawqi al-Su'ud in the following line. So here's the condition that you have to have in order to do your own independent reasoning. The word faqih is synonymous with the word mujtahid. In classical, this is the haqiqah, this is the meaning of faqih is really mujtahid, even though it has meanings that are urfiyah, right? But that's the real meaning. Coupled with those things which bear upon him the burden of responsibility, such as his being of extreme intelligence by nature. He has to be intelligent. And there is some debate about one who is known to reject juristic analogy, like qiyas. In other words, the Zahiri people rejected qiyas, but in fact they did qiyas, they just semantically called it something else. I mean, they have qiyas, but they reject it semantically more than they do actually in practice. And there's people now that do that because they're trying to revive his madhab. He knows the juristic responsibilities through intellectual proofs, and thus a clear transmitted proof indicates otherwise. In other words, this is called bara'at al-asliyah. The faqih has to know that everything is permitted unless there's a clear proof against it. And the onus is on the one claiming that something is haram. The onus is on the one claiming that something is haram. And the muthbit is muqaddam ala nafi. If you have one person saying it's haram and the other person saying it's halal, and they both have their proofs, usul says the one saying it's halal is the one that you follow. In other words, we're affirming ummah before we're negating in our usul. Right? Because it's Hanafiyyat as-samha, it's a forgiving tradition. It's generous. And then he says, here he goes on to mention the other conditions. he has to have the sciences of grammar. What does that mean? Does it mean you know the Ajurrumiya? No. And you have to be a master in the science of grammar. Not basic level. You have to understand adawat. You have to understand the subtle meanings of all of the different huruf. You have to understand muqaddim, mu'akhar. You have to understand all of the subtleties of the Arabic language, because that's what the revelation is in. You have to know prosody. You have to know versification. Why? Why would you have to know the science of poetry? Why would a mujtahid have to know poetry? Allah says, مَا عَلَمْنَهُ الشَّعْرُ وَمَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُ. We didn't teach him poetry, and it's not appropriate for him to use it. Why would you have to know poetry? Allahu Akbar. That's exactly why. Because most of what we know about the meanings of the Arabic words come from Jahili poets. The Quran is explained through the poetry of the Jahili Arabs. And if you don't understand, they knew it just by what's called sajiyya or saliqa. They just knew it because they were Arabs. And they knew when a verse was wrong. We don't know that anymore. So we have to learn what's called arud. We have to learn the qawafi. We have to learn the different abhur, the different metered ways, so that we can know whether it's a sound piece of poetry or not. Philology, you have to know ishtiqaqat, you have to know where roots come from, because philology is a very important science in interpreting the Quran. Combined with those of usul and rhetoric, he also has to master. You have to know balagha. And you say, well, Sahaba didn't know balagha. Absolutely not. They knew balagha 100%. They didn't have words for it. But they knew when something was raqiq. They knew when it was weak. And this is why the Arabs said about the Prophet ﷺ that not only did he speak to every tribe in their native dialect. If the Yemenis came, he spoke in the most rhetorically effective manner in that native dialect. That's how he was described by his own companions, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If the Yemenis came, not only did he speak in their dialect, he spoke in the most rhetorically powerful way that could be done in that dialect. So in other words, if you're living in the United States, television's kind of wiped this out, but traditionally you had dialects in regions. And what that would mean is, if somebody from the South came to me, I would start speaking to him in his language, not in a way that's affected to where they would feel like he's making fun of me. It would be in a way that they would feel that I was one of them, that I was actually from them, because he's from the Arab. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allahumma salli ala, لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ. There's come to you a messenger from your own selves, which means all of the Arabs, with the exception of Bani Taghlib. It's the only tribe that he did not have relatives from. All the Arabs on the entire Arabian Peninsula, the Prophet had relatives from. He was connected to every single tribe, with the exception of Bani Taghlib, because they were Christian Arabs. And Allah did not place any Christian in their Ummiyun, because he was from the Ummiyin. And Bani Taghlib were from Ahl al-Kitab. So he was related to all of his people. And he spoke to them in a way that they felt, subhanallah, it's like he sent him from Himyar. It's like he sent him from Bani Tamim. So it's amazing. It's a mu'jiza of the Prophet ﷺ. And he even used Ajami words with the Ajamis. Like he used Habashi, when the Habashis, he would use some words just to honor them. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And then, according to the people of precision, he has to know where judgments can be found without the condition of having memorized the actual text. So the ulama say that he doesn't have to memorize all the hadith. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that if I say, oh, well, alhamdulillah, then I've got my collection of Bukhari, my collection of Muslim, my collection of Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, all these things, then can I go and do these things because memorization is not? No. You have to have studied each one of those books with a hadith master, and have isnad and ijaza, and know which is the correct dabt, because there's different dabt in the hadith. In other words, al-Bukhari, there's different riwayat that have different ashkal and things like that, and you have to know that. So you can't just buy the books. The books have to be authenticated, like in India, where they still maintain hadith tradition. They have authenticated, certified editions of the books that are then read with a scholar. The books, they still transmit them with absolute certainty of their transmission. And then he says, And above all these, of all these that we've just mentioned, he has to be a middle-ranked mastery. In other words, he has to be a master and of middle stature. He can't be like average. He has to be a master, which is above average, and amongst the masters, he has to have middle. In other words, he can have some middle stature in his mastery. But he has to be a master, which is not average. It's above average. He has to know those matters where there's ijma'. So there's ijma'at. So he has to know where everybody's in agreement. He must know things such as the condition of a single hadith, the ahad and the mutawatir and the aziz. He has to know the mashhur. He has to know when a hadith is ahad, because that has a hukm, as opposed to a hadith that's mutawatir, as opposed to a hadith that's aziz. They have different ahkam related to them. Furthermore, he has to know the abrogated and the abrogating. Ibn Wahb, who's one of the strongest men of Imam al-Bukhari and a master of hadith, he said he memorized so many hadiths, he became completely confused and was worried for his own deen, that he was going to go astray, until he came to Imam Malik radiallahu anhu. And then he would relate the hadith to Imam Malik, and he would say, da'a hada, khudh min hada, da'a hada, hada mansukh, hada muqayyad. You know, he would tell them, this hadith, yufassiruhu, this hadith. And he went through all the hadiths until, khalas, he knew what was valid and what was no longer valid to follow. Right? And that's why Ibn Uyayna said the hadith is mudalla. It's a place where people go astray, except for the people of fiqh. They're the people. Even Al-Bukhari was not a faqih. There's some debate about that. He generally follows the tabweeb of the fuqaha, but he's not considered a faqih. He was not a mujtahid. Despite the fact he memorized all those hadiths, he was not, and if you look, he's not interpreting the hadith. Rare exception, he makes some ta'liq, but generally he's not. He's a transmitter. And then he has to know also under the conditions which the verses were revealed or the hadith. So there's what's called asbab al-nuzul and asbab al-wurud. Asbab al-nuzul relates to the ayat. He has to know what the circumstances were when the ayats were revealed. Asbab al-wurud means he has to know what the circumstances in the hadith. When did the Prophet ﷺ say the hadith? Because that relates to understanding the hadith in its context. And you'll be amazed when you see, because many of the hadiths don't have the asbab al-wurud in them. When you read books that have the science of asbab al-wurud, suddenly the hadith makes sense in a way that it didn't make sense before. Guarantee you. And it's just extraordinary to see that. And then Muhammad Ilish, great scholar from Al-Azhar, was asked once. Now, this is, I think, the key to this whole point that Murabit Al-Hajj is making. So after he tells you all this, he says, now, consider all of the above mentioned, rahimakallah, may Allah have mercy on you. Think about what he's just said. Because this is agreed upon, these conditions. This is not... And you see for yourself whether your companion, in other words, whether the person's saying, no, you have to follow the book and the sunnah and not the imams. See for yourself whether he's characterized by such qualities and fulfills these conditions. And then Murabit Al-Hajj says, and I highly doubt it. More likely he is just pointing people to himself in his demands that the people of this age take their judgments directly from the book and the sunnah. كَمُسْتَدِلًا عَلَى نَفْسِهِ. He's saying, look at me. Now, that's getting into the psychology of why people do things, right? Which is, it's a painful thing. You know, to really look at what are our motivations and why are we doing things and what is this about. The Arabs say, خَالِفْ تَعْرَفْ. Go against the grain and people will point at you. Right? Be a maverick and people will point at you. Sayyidina Ali once was in a masjid in Kufa and there was a qassas there. And the Sahaba hated the qassasin. People that used to tell stories, that were fabrications. They were like embellished stories. And some of them were very effective, the qassasin. Yahya ibn Yahya al-Laythi says on his way to, I think it's Yahya ibn Yahya al-Laythi, on his way to Medina, he said that there was a qassas with them. He was a young man. He said he used to get up after every prayer on the journey. They were going to Medina, and he used to tell these stories, and he'd have everybody weeping. And he said that the people were very affected by him. And when they got to Medina, he got up after the prayer and he started to tell his story, and the little children in the mosque threw sandals at him and told him to, be quiet. And he was stricken by, he said, what's going on? What? And he looked at one of the men from Medina, and he said, if the little children hadn't done that, we would have been forced to do it. We don't have qasasin in the masjid of the Prophet. We don't have these people in the masjid. This is a place to learn the deen. Right? And so the Sahaba didn't like qasasin. One man was telling a story, and Sayyidina Ali wasn't listening to him. He was talking to his people. And one of the men said, أَتُعْرِضُ عَنْ هَذَا? And he looked over at the man and he said, هَذَا الَّذِي يُنَادِي أَعْرِفُونِي أَعْرِفُونِي. This guy over here who's saying, look at me, look at me. That's a painful analysis, right? In other words, look how clever I am, look how... That's what he's pointing out, that there's just ego. That's all we're dealing with. It's just raw ego here. And there's a man I know, Muhammad Abu Bakr, he's from Ghana, and he's a very, very interesting scholar. But he told me once, I was at this conference, and he said, for me it's painful to see so many people that are just really just displaying their pathology in public arenas. I mean, there's a difference, right, between activism and action. Right? There's a big difference between the two. Activism, and I'm saying this as a former activist, activism is often nothing other than working out your own psychological problems in a public arena. So if you're angry, you begin to justify your anger by using objects of your anger which are justifiably objects of anger. But the reason that you're attacking them is not because you're really indignant about those things. The reason you're attacking them is because you're angry as an individual, and you want to justify your anger, so you direct it at objects of anger. I mean, this is what they call sublimation, right? Sublimation. You sublimate your pathology and find some socially acceptable arena, right, to display it. And people were doing it all the time, and it's very sad. And this is why you have to have tazkiyah. That's why the foundation of our deen is tazkiyah. You have to purify the self. When the man asked the Prophet ﷺ, who's the mujahid fi sabilillah? Who's the mujahid? And that's a very important question. Who is the one really struggling for the sake of Allah? And the Prophet ﷺ said, first he told him who wasn't the mujahid, right? The one that's fighting to be called brave is not a mujahid, right? The one who's fighting to be called brave is not a mujahid. The one who's fighting for some worldly gain is not a mujahid. The one who's fighting because he's just angry, and he wants a social outlet for his anger. People that want to go kill people. Who then is the mujahid? The one who struggles in order that the kalimah of Allah is paramount. That's the mujahid. There's no ulterior motive there. And that's why one of the first people to be thrust into the fire is the so-called mujahid. When Allah says, what did you do with your life? He said, I struggled in your way. He said, you're a liar. You went out and fought to be called a brave man. And you got your reward. In other words, people said you were a brave man, and that's why you did it. So, you get your reward. So that's what he's saying. Look at what's going on. What's the underlying thing here? Why is this person doing that? Because our tradition is simply based on just saying, I don't know anything, and admitting that fact, and then just saying, I'm going to follow people who know. Simple as that, right? Rumi's story about the three fish, right, in the lake, when the fisherman comes, and the first fish says it's time to head for the ocean, and he sets out on the journey. The second fish says he's the most intelligent fish in the lake, and if he's going, I think I should go. And he tells the third one, come on, let's get out of here. The third one says, no, that's a big lake, don't worry about it. And he takes off, and the third one gets caught by the fisherman in the net, and then he's put in the frying pan, and then in the frying pan he says, if I ever get back to the lake, I'm heading for the ocean. Right? So Rumi says that, the first one are the prophets. They're the ones that head for the ocean. And the second are the people who are intelligent enough to follow the prophets. And the third are the people that in the fire, they're the ones saying, لَيْتَنِي لَمْ أَتَّخِذْ فُلَانًا خَلِيلًا. Would that I didn't take so-and-so. It's too late. Right? So we follow. That's what we are. We're followers. We're atba'. We're people who follow. So he says, what do you say in this thing, Muhammad? He says, what do you say about somebody who says that he follows the Quran and the Hadith, and then he says about people who follow the Imams, I say Allah and His Messenger say, and you reply Malik says, and Ibn al-Qasim or Khalil says, and it's interesting, this is 100 years ago. So things haven't changed. This is a recent thing. It's only 100 years old. This movement is only 100 years old. And that's it. 100 years ago, we still hear this. It's like a direct quotation of what a lot of people now say. I say, Allah and His Messenger say, and you tell me the madhab of Imam Malik says? Here's the hadith, brother. What are you following? Are you following Malik, who said himself, everybody's speech is put before Allah and His Messenger, and if it doesn't correspond, then you throw it out? And I tell you the Ma'soom said, and you tell me somebody who can make a mistake says, so what does he say about that? My answer to this is as follows. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. It is not permissible for a common person to abandon following the four Imams and take directly from the textual sources of Quran and Hadith, for the simple reason that this entails a great many conditions that have been clarified in the books of Usul. Moreover, these conditions are rarely met by the great scholars, especially in these last days, in which Islam has become a stranger just as it began a stranger. Ibn Uyayna said, the hadith are a source of error except for jurisprudence. What he means is that people other than the scholars might interpret a tradition based on an apparent meaning, and yet the hadith may have another interpretation based on some other hadith that clarifies the meaning, or some proof that remains hidden. After a long discussion, he remarks, as for their saying, how can you leave Quran verses and sound hadith and follow the Imams in their ijtihad, when they have a clear probability of error, whereas the Quran and the Hadith can't have error? His answer to them is as follows. Surely the following of our rightly guided Imams is not abandoning the Quranic verses or the sound Hadith. It is the very essence of adhering to them and taking our judgments from them. This is because the Quran has not come down to us except by the means of these very Imams, who are more worthy of following by virtue of being more knowledgeable than us in the sciences of abrogating and abrogated, absolute, conditional, equivocal, and clarifying, the probabilistic and plain, the circumstances surrounding their revelations and their various meanings, as well as their possible interpretations, various linguistics and philological considerations, not to mention the various other ancillary sciences involved in understanding the Quran needed. Also, they took all that from the students of the companions, who received their instruction from the companions themselves, who received their instructions from the lawgiver himself, may Allah grant him peace and safety, divinely protected from every mistake, who bore witness that the first three generations of Muslims would be ones of virtue and righteousness. Furthermore, the prophetic traditions have also reached us through their means, given that they were also more knowledgeable than those who came after them concerning the rigorously authenticated, sahih, the well-authenticated, hasan, the weak, da'if, and as well as the marfu', the mursal, the mutawatir, the ahad, the mu'dal, and the gharib transmissions. Thus, as far as this little band of men is concerned, there is only one of two possibilities. Either they are attributing ignorance to those Imams whose knowledge is considered by consensus to have reached what is humanly possible of perfection, and is witnessed in several generations by the truthful lawgiver, upon him prayers and peace, or they are actually attributing misguidance and lack of deen to the Imams, who are all from the best generations by the testimony of the magnificent Messenger himself. Surely it is not the eyes that are blind, but the hearts in the breast that go blind. As for their saying to the one who imitates Malik, we say to you Allah says, and you say Malik says, or Ibn Qasim or Khalil, what that means is Malik says based on his deep understanding of the word of Allah or the words of the Messenger, or of those firmly adhering to the actions of the companions or of the tabi'een who clearly understood the word of Allah and the meaning of the followers. As for the one who leaves their leadership and says Allah said and His Messenger said, he has relied solely on his own understanding, despite the fact that he is incapable of having any precision in the verses and the hadith that he quotes, since he is unable even to provide chains of transmission with any authority, let alone that he lacks knowledge concerning the abrogated and the abrogated, the absolute and the conditional, the ambiguous and the clarifying, the apparent and the textual, the general and the specific, the dimensions of the Arabic, the cause of the revelation, the various linguistic considerations, and other various ancillary sciences needed. So consider for yourself which is preferable. the word of a follower who simply quotes the understanding of Malik and Imam by consensus, or the word of an ignoramus who said, Allah said and His Messenger said, but it is not the sight that goes blind, but rather the hearts and the breast. Furthermore, know that the origin of this deviation is from the Zahiriyah who appeared in Andalusia and whose power waxed for a period until Allah obliterated all traces of them, until this little band of men set about to revive their beliefs. Imam al-Barzuli said, the first one who ever attacked the Mudawwana, he's using Maliki sources because he's a Maliki in a Maliki country. But we could use the same, say Imam Shafi, Imam Ahmed, Imam Abu Hanifa, the same. But he's writing to primarily Malikis, that's why he's using that. So he says, if you consider the above-mentioned text, you will realize that the one who censors you from following the Imams is truly a deviant. And I am using the word deviant to describe them only because the scholars before me have labeled this little band and their view as deviant. Moreover, you should know that those who condemn your adherence to the Imams have been fully refuted by Muhammad al-Khadir bin Mayaba with the most piercing of refutations, and he himself called them in his book, The People of Deviation and Heterodoxy. He called his book Refuting the People of Deviation and Heterodoxy who attack the following of the Imams of independent reasoning. And I used to have a copy, but I no longer do. So my brother, I seriously warn you from following the madhab of these people, and even from sitting in their company, unless there is an absolute necessity. And certainly from listening to anything they have to say, because the scholars have declared their ideas deviant. Ibn al-Hajj says in his book, Al-Madkhal, Umar ibn Abd al-Aziz said, never give one whose heart is deviant access to your two ears, for surely you never know what may find fixity in you. I ask Allah to make you and me from those who listen to matters and follow the best of them. So that's his fatwa about that issue. And I just wanted to, clarify that that is the position of the Ummah for 1200 years. Right? Really, that's the position. And I ask anyone in this room to show me one Imam before the 19th century who did not put the name, for the last 1200 years, who did not put the name of his Imam after his name. Anyone. Just one. An Imam in which there's consensus about him who did not say Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani al-Shafi'i, Qadi Iyad al-Maliki, Imam al-Tahawi al-Hanafi, Imam al-Jassas al-Hanafi. Right? Anyone. Imam Abdullah al-Haddad al-Shafi'i, Imam al-Haramain al-Shafi'i. Any one of them. Ibn Taymiyyah al-Hanbali, Imam al-Dhahabi al-Hanbali, Ibn Kathir al-Hanbali, Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali. Any one. Just one Imam that didn't have that name attached to him. And you can't. So, I just think that's important for people. Inshallah, I'm going to get copies for everybody to take one of these. Yeah, that's called what's called talfiq, which is like joining the madhabs. It's generally frowned upon by the scholars because that in itself means that you're at a level to pick. In other words, that in itself is a type of maqam, to be able to pick. Not based on there, but you think based on period? Right. Can you pay it in money according to the Hanafi as opposed? Yeah. Right. Well, even the Hanafi position, that's not that's a rukhsa, isn't it? To pay with money. Are you Shafi? Is Sheikh Faisal here? Is somebody know the Hanafi position about that? I think it's a rukhsa in the Hanafi madhab. I don't think it's preferred that they pay in food. Allahu alam. I guess my point is, like just because I like that one. Yeah, no, that's called ittiba' al-hawa. That's following your. Laziness, but just because like you have personal preferences. Yeah, well, that's hawa. That is what hawa is. Hawa is your personal inclination, and they say the best hawa is the one that yuwafiq al-shara'. In other words, if you don't like onions and garlic just by nature, it's nice because the Prophet ﷺ didn't eat onions and garlic, right? But you can't start saying, لا أنا أتجنب البصل والثوم. الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يكره البصل والثوم. You don't like it, but you're using it, as a way of like, no, I don't eat those. The Prophet never ate them. But the truth is, you just don't like them. There's people. Sheikh Bayya, Hafizahullah, he's amazing qadi in the Emirates. And one time we were talking about Imam Malik, his position about Shawwal. It's makruh in the Maliki madhab to fast the 6 days of Shawwal immediately after the Eid. Imam Malik said that it just means 6 days during the year, and Shawwal was just mentioned. In other words, he doesn't see that it's specifically Shawwal. It just means 6 days throughout the year. And he also considered it makruh because Imam Malik has an usuli principle in which he will actually prohibit something or say it's makruh out of not wanting people to think that it's a fard. يعني خشية اعتقاد الوجوب, it's called, out of fear that people will think they have to do it. So Sheikh Bey was telling me about that, and I said, and he said to me, I said, so you don't fast them? He said, no, I've never fasted them. And then I said, subhanAllah, I've never fasted them either, but it wasn't because I knew that hukm, it's just because I was lazy. and he laughed and he said, it's the same with me. Yeah. That's true. Yeah. إذا صح الحديث فهو مذهبي, which is true for Imam Shafi'i. It's not true for Imam Malik. Imam Malik does not say that. You will not find a statement in which Imam Malik says إذا صح الحديث فهو مذهبي. Imam Malik was actually, Imam Shafi'i was clarifying in that statement his difference with Imam Malik, because Imam Malik considered the actions of the people of Medina to be at the level of mutawatir hadith. And therefore, if the actions of the people of Medina differed from a sahih hadith which was ahad, Imam Malik took the actions of the people of Medina over the hadith. Whereas Imam Shafi'i said, no, I can't agree with you there, because he was a mujtahid mutlaq. He said, إذا صح الحديث فهو مذهبي. I'm going with the sahih hadith. Alright? So he did say that, but I can give you many, many examples of hadiths in which you will have two completely different opinions in two different sahih hadith, two different sahih chains of transmission. And then you have what is called a tanaqud. And if you don't know nasikh and mansukh, if you don't know khas and am, muqayyid and mutlaq, mujmal and mubayyin, if you don't know how to discern, there's no way that you can do that for yourself. So that is true. Imam Shafi'i did say that, and Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu said, whoever doesn't know where I took my rulings from cannot give fatwa by my madhab. He can't give a fatwa of my opinion. What he was telling us, if you're going to be a mufti, you better have the dalil that I have. In other words, you have to consider what I'm doing, because this is deen. So they're speaking to people at a certain level. They're not speaking to us, because I don't have the tools. I mean, my knowledge of Arabic, which is, it's not, if I put myself, compare myself to modern speakers of Arabic, then it's probably reasonable. But if I compare myself to previous generations of educated Arabs, it's horrendous. Right? Really. I don't have the knowledge of Arabic to be reading hadith with any skill. I really don't. Yeah. So I can't say, I mean, even though Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu said that, وَعَلَى عَيْنِ وَالرَّأْسِ, like the Arab said, I mean, with all respect to the Imam, I can't take that as my position, because I don't have the ability to do that. So it is true, إِذَا صَحَّ الْحَدِيث فَهُوَ مَذْهَبِ. That is absolutely a true statement for the mujtahid who's muqayyad of Imam Shafi'i's madhab, or he's a mujtahid mutlaq who agrees with Imam Shafi'i that a hadith sahih is over, for instance, the amal of Ahl al-Madinah, or Imam Abu Hanifa has certain things where he'll go against the sahih hadith because of other usuli considerations. So the imams aren't the same on that position. But that is true. It's what Imam Ali, كلمة الحق يراد بها الباطل. It's true, the statement, but what they're using it for is not true. So truth can be used, it can be used for and against truth. I mean, truth is we can manipulate it. Right? I'll give you an example. Ibn Shihab, who's one of the fuqaha of Medina, brilliant scholar. He's in most of the hadith transmissions. He's from the Rijal of al-Bukhari. He was a mujtahid. He was in Medina, and he was one of the teachers of Imam Malik. He was in Medina, and a man came into the masjid, and he said, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Imam Ibn Shihab went up to him and he said, Assalamu alaikum, where are you from? And the man said, Al-Iraq. And he said, where did you get that two taslima from? And the man said, عن النخعي عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أو عن ابن عباس لقد رأيت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. And he gave the hadith with the isnad. Not very many people can do that. But he gave the hadith with the, and Ibn Shihab said, لا أعرفه. I don't know that hadith. And so the man said, the Iraqi said to him, MashaAllah, تحفظ حديث رسول الله كله? Do you know all of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ? And Ibn Shihab said, no. And he said, ثلثي? Do you know 2/3? He said, no. He said, نصفه? He said, نعم. He said, I know half of them. And then the man said, اجعله في النصف الآخر. Put it in the other half that you don't know. Now, the point, and then the beauty of that story is that Ibn Shihab ضحك. It made him laugh. In other words, he wasn't an egotist. He thought, you got a good point there. But Abu Bakr Ibn al-Arabi uses that story as a proof for the transmission in Tirmidhi that the Prophet Aisha said when the Prophet ﷺ used to give his taslima, he only did it one time and to the right. He used to say Assalamu alaikum one time, and that was all. He didn't go to the... That is the position of the Maliki Madhab. Now the hadith has some weakness in it. But Imam Malik said, even though there's some weakness in the transmission, everybody in Medina does that. And these tabi'een saw the Sahaba doing it. And these are ulama. So this is the amal of the people of Medina. And even though I know there are sahih hadith that said he used to do it twice, I have a hadith that says he did it one time on Aisha, and even though there's some weakness in it, the amal of Ahl al-Madinah strengthens the hadith for me. So his usul said, no, I'm going with one taslima, because I'd rather take 1,000 tabi'een who saw 1,000 sahaba praying a certain way than take a narrative of the ahad. And that's a Maliki position. Imam Shafi'i said, no, I've got a sahih hadith, and I don't agree with Imam Malik about the amal of Ahl al-Madinah. He just doesn't consider it an authoritative. He does in some things, but not in all things. Because all the imams consider it authoritative in certain things. So here's an example where you say, where did you get that taslima from? You know, the hadith right there. And then you say, well, there's a hadith in Tirmidhi. They say, no, that's a weak hadith. So why are you following a weak hadith when there's a sahih hadith here? Well, because of the amal of Ahl al-Madinah. The amal of Ahl al-Madinah, you know, here's a hadith sahih, and you're telling me the amal of Ahl al-Madinah? This is an usuli difference. And Imam Malik is an imam by ijma'. And the ummah has always agreed that he was rightly guided. In fact, there's a hadith that says that in the end of time, not in the end of time, but there will come a time when people will strike their camels looking for somebody in the east and the west. They'll look for somebody of knowledge, and they won't find anyone more knowledgeable than the alim of Medina. And Ibn Uyayna and all the muhaddithin said, we used to interpret it to mean Malik radiallahu anhu. So even Imam Suyuti in his Khasais al-Nabuwa puts that hadith as a proof of the Nabuwa of the Prophet, that he mentioned Imam Malik would come. Right? And I'm not, trumpeting the horn of the Maliki Madhab. I'm not. Because they're all, as far as I'm concerned, they're all equal. Wallahi. And I say that, qalban wa qaliban. All the madhab are equal in my estimation. They're all rightly guided. I don't have anything to say about any of them or say, this one's better than that one. No. I became Muslim through Malikis, and then I went and studied with Mauritanians. That's why I'm Maliki. Sheikh Nuh is an American from the West Coast who became Muslim with Syrians who were Shafi'is, and he became a Shafi'i. Had it been reversed, I'd be telling you stories about Imam Shafi'i instead of Imam Malik, and right? It's simple as that. So there's no ta'assub, there's no point of saying, no, this is the right way and there's no other way or something like that. Uh-huh. Yeah. It's because what he's saying is this is za'ir. It's somebody there's deviancy in their heart. And it's dangerous to sit with those people because that you can get affected by them. Imam al-Awza'i, when he saw people of bid'ah walk by, he used to plug his ears And somebody asked him why he did that. And he said, I heard two of them talking 20 years ago, and it's still ringing in my ear. No, there's things people tell me, I don't want to hear them. I mean, it's true or not true. People come and they tell you news, please don't. I don't want to think about that. You know, people tell me stuff they got off the internet about the Prophet ﷺ. I don't want to hear it. The internet is just smut. Really. I mean, it's just smut. That's all. There's nothing, there's no valid sources on there, nothing. It's you know, virtual. I'm just translating into Arabic. You'll say it's a virtual transmission. Riwaya wahmiya. That's how, wahmiya is virtual now in modern Arabic, right? Wahm means nothing. It's an illusion. So don't take your information from the internet. We have to stop? Alhamdulillah. Was there any question? One thing? Go ahead. It's not fair to, yeah.
From this story, basically, you said that we were the followers of the fish that went to the ocean. And I'm left realizing that I have absolutely no idea how to follow. Because I realize I know, I can't interpret Hindu things where I am supposed to do that. Like, how am I supposed to do it?
Well, I mean, it's very easy. It's not complicated. There are certain texts that have been transmitted in this ummah for centuries. They're considered rightly guided. You submit to the text. That's all it is. Like Al-Akhdari, which I'm going to start on the next session, not tonight, but tomorrow. Al-Akhdari is a text that's been used for several centuries in Africa. All the imams agreed it's a valid text. I submit to the text. If there's a mistake in the text, it's clarified by the teacher that I studied with the text with. He said this isn't the dominant opinion. They clarified because the texts have been worked out. The rough edges, right? They've been worked out. Like Ibn Ashar radiallahu anhu has 7 fara'id of wudu, 8 sunan of wudu, and 11 virtuous acts of wudu. Imam al-Akhdari has 7 fara'id, which agree, 8 sunan, and then he has only 8 virtuous acts, and omits the 11. If you look in some books, there's 14, 16 virtuous acts. So there's some differences, but they're clarified by the teachers that you study with, those differences. And that's why, the text that I teach, alhamdulillah, all the texts that I teach, I studied with a teacher. I don't teach anything, inshallah, that I didn't study with somebody. I don't. Or didn't get permission to teach to them. So I don't. Which doesn't mean I'm not going to, I make mistakes. But inshallah, is what I say, I'm not going to make big mistakes, inshallah. In other words, no, seriously, I'm not going to, that's the thing, hopefully, I'm not going to make big mistakes that, that are dangerous. I might one time say there's 10 fada'il instead of 11, right? And that's something that can be clarified easily. It's not something, but I'm not going to tell you, that Allah is in every place with His essence or something like that. Because that's a big mistake. That's not a little mistake. Right? Or that the world is eternal, which some of the imams said, right? There are imams that said that. Ibn Rushd was accused of saying that, Allahu A'lam, right? But some of the imams said that. Ibn Taymiyyah says that in one of his transmissions, that the world, and this was a belief of some of the imams, that the world was eternal. In other words, the matter that the world was made up of was eternal. It's a Greek philosophical belief, the hayula. So, or that the fire goes out. There's some ulama of Islam that said the fire goes out. Yafna, an-naru tafna. That's a big mistake. That's not a little mistake. So those type mistakes, inshallah, you won't hear those from either Abdullah or myself. Inshallah. Or Sheikh Ahmed or, Sheikh Faisal, inshallah. And that's not isma. It's not that it's being ma'soom. It's that we adhere to the text that we're teaching. And the text has an isma. See, the ijma' is ma'soom. People forget that. The ijma' of the ummah is also ma'soom. It's not, the Prophet is ma'soom, the Book of Allah is ma'soom, the sunnah in its totality is also ma'soom. The individual hadiths are not ma'soom unless they're mutawatir, but the sunnah in its totality is ma'soom. In other words, the sunnah is definitely there. We know what it was and it's protected because it's part of the deen. The Arabic language protected. Right? There's differences, but the vehicle to understanding the Quran is ma'soom. It's there, it's protected, mahfuz by Allah. And the ijma' is ma'soom. So if you adhere to a text, you're mahfuz from making mistakes. You'll be protected. If you deviate from the text and start going on your own opinion, that's where you'll get into trouble. Because these texts have been worked out by scholars over the centuries, and they've been perfected through commentary and through revision. All right? So, jazakumullah khairan, and if you have questions, think about things, and I don't mind in another session asking something that might